Hey, hello, and welcome back to another episode of Summon Few, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for tuning in. Well, as you might see from the title of this video, today we are going to be talking about, is it really that expensive for a normal person to own a superbike, ladies and gentlemen? As you might know, I do own a beautiful Ducati Monster 797, ladies and gentlemen, from the year 2016, and today we are going to be taking down the factors that makes people seem that owning a superbike is expensive, ladies and gentlemen. But in truth, is it so? Well, we'll figure that out in today's video, ladies and gentlemen. With that said, let's jump straight in. So, ladies and gentlemen, with that said, three major points before owning even a superbike, ladies and gentlemen. The first ever point is going to be the paperwork, ladies and gentlemen. So, let's say you're buying a motorcycle first hand, and not like me buying a second hand motorcycle, but still, if you're buying a first hand motorcycle, the paperwork for the insurance as well as the name transfer and everything is carried out by the company itself, ladies and gentlemen. And that cost is included in your total final bill. When you do see the bill, ladies and gentlemen, you will see that RTO and service charges will be applied on that. But in case if you are like me, and if you do not have enough cash to buy the first hand motorcycle, the motorcycle of your dream on first hand, then you might be second hand. Then you might be used to buying a used motorcycle like this one, ladies and gentlemen. Again, as I told you before, this is a 2016 used Ducati Monster which has run about 12 to 13,000 kilometers the first time I bought it. So, if you're buying this motorcycle, ladies and gentlemen, keep in fact that you may need to, do a lot of backhand dealings to reduce the rate, because in India specifically, if you do own a motorcycle that is above the weight class of 500cc, the taxes as well as the green tax on this motorcycle is going to be upwards towards, I think so, at least 17% to that of the original motorcycle cost, the total vehicle cost when it was brand new, ladies and gentlemen. So take into factor that cost also, and also name changes, insurance, everything is going to be there. So approximately, let's say if you're buying a bike in second hand, let's say it's going to cost you upwards of 1,20,000 approximately, including the paperwork for the transfer papers as well as the tax, the road tax, the legal stuff, as well as everything that is needed in order to drive this motorcycle legally on the road, ladies and gentlemen. As you might see, this motorcycle is registered as DL, and still I have not yet paid paperwork to be done, because it takes a little bit time, ladies and gentlemen. The process has been started, but unfortunately due to some issues, and also this is a Delhi motorcycle, so it has to go through Delhi's customs, as well as they have to check the paperwork, every bullshit nonsense there, ladies and gentlemen. So it's taking a little bit time, but don't worry, before I think post the next video, this bike will be registered under my name. But as of right now, it is under my name. There's the process been started. So if you do search this motorcycle, it's going to be under my name. So anyway, with that said, ladies and gentlemen, that's the first ever biggest cost of owning a high-end CZ motorcycle, ladies and gentlemen. Whether this be a Ducati Monster, Yamaha R1, a Triumph Daytona 660, a Honda CBR 1000, SP, anything, ladies and gentlemen, the rates are going to be the same. Well, it's going to be in the difference is going to be either 20,000 or 30,000 rupees. That's the difference is going to be. Not much, ladies and gentlemen. So, number one is going to be the legal stuff and the paperwork, ladies and gentlemen. Number two, whether you're buying a motorcycle first class or even the second class, on a used hand market, ladies and gentlemen, number two is going to be the main one, ladies and gentlemen, the maintenance on this motorcycle. Well, if you're buying a motorcycle on the first hand side of things, then you do not need to worry for the first 10 to 15,000 kilometers, because service is obviously free, and you might need to change only the oils as well, the important wear and tear parts like the brake pads, oils, air filters, etc. And that's not going to cost you anything. Basically, it's going to cost you about 1,000 to 1,500. Well, if you do it in the outside markets or the aftermarket store, it's going to cost a little even less. But that's new vehicles, ladies and gentlemen. In older vehicles, if you do buy an older vehicle, ladies and gentlemen, like mine, well, you need to take into consideration that it has run almost 12 to 13,000 kilometers in my vehicle, of course. you might have run more or you might have been running less, and you do not know how the owner has treated it before you, ladies and gentlemen. It's either a track used vehicle or it's just driven to the nearby store and back. If in that case, for the second case, then maintenance not gonna be that much. But in case of mine, it's been track driven a lot and it's been abused a lot, so parts are gonna be costly. And if you're buying a second-hand used motorcycle, ladies and gentlemen, obviously it's gonna be old, a vintage motorcycle, and the parts for it are gonna be a little less available, so you have to adjust with that also. And the cost of bringing the parts from other countries, for example mine is an Italian motorcycle, so you have to export every single part from Italy, ladies and gentlemen. It's gonna take time. You've already seen my videos, ladies and gentlemen, how much time I have taken to bring this motorcycle back to life, right? And still there are parts missing that I have not yet received, ladies and gentlemen. Obviously it's going to be receiving in a couple of months, but still, as I told you, that parts you need to consider that, ladies and gentlemen. With that said, the second generation, and in the third is going to be overall general riding of this motorcycle, ladies and gentlemen. Well, before buying a Superbike or before buying any top end CC bike above the 500cc class in India at least, take into consideration that you're not going to be driving that motorcycle on a daily basis. That's why I do have an Yamaha RX100, ladies and gentlemen. That's my city use or my EV scooter, ladies and gentlemen. And this I only take it for rallies and important functions like the distinguished gentleman's ride, etc. That's one thing you should consider when buying a Superbike, ladies and gentlemen, because again, the third most important cost is going to be the fuel, ladies and gentlemen. These big bikes tend to run at higher speed, so if you drive them at lower speed, like in the city limits, you cannot drive 200 kilometers per hour in city limits, ladies and gentlemen. That's illegal. The police will get you and you probably will spend a night in jail, so don't do that. Anyway, that said, take into consideration that the fuel on these big motorcycles, they drink a lot, ladies and gentlemen. And if you try to run them below 20 to 30 kilometers an hour, good luck having a bank balance, ladies and gentlemen. It's gonna be an expensive thing to run. But if you're driving this on an occasion like in a Sunday rides or long ride, if you're doing long rides, then no issues, ladies and gentlemen. If you're driving like 200, 300 kilometers or so, then these motorcycles are perfect for you. But if you're doing short runs, do not ever buy a Superbike, ladies and gentlemen. If you do have cash to buy a Superbike, ladies and gentlemen, yes, you can buy a motorcycle, but keep all of these factors in cost, ladies and gentlemen. Again, to repeat, ladies and gentlemen, to recap what I just said, number one point is going to be the paperwork, ladies and gentlemen. Obviously, do the right paperwork, do the right thing to make your bike legal on the streets. Do not drive without any legal paperwork, ladies and gentlemen. That's bad. Number two is gonna be the general maintenance cost of these motorcycles, ladies and gentlemen. Whether it's gonna be spares, changing labels, everything, ladies and gentlemen, it's gonna get high for sure. Number three is gonna be the fuel cost of these motorcycles. Fuel cost to keep these motorcycles running, ladies and gentlemen, it's gonna be also high. Technically not that much high, depends on your driving style, but in a whole it's gonna be high, ladies and gentlemen. So to answer the age-old question, is it really expensive to own a goddamn Superbike, ladies and gentlemen? Well, technically yes. Ladies and gentlemen. It's a little bit difficult to buy a Superbike or a super motorcycle for a middle class family. But the amount of joy, happiness, and the things that you learn when you do buy a Superbike or even any high-end class motorcycle, ladies and gentlemen, that no amount of money can satisfy you, or no amount of money can give you that joy, that pleasure, that learning experience that you get when you buy a brand new motorcycle that is, a leader class motorcycle that is in the 1000cc category or more, ladies and gentlemen. With that said, I'm not telling you to do any financial any bad financial decisions of buying a superbike, ladies and gentlemen. I'm telling you the facts. If you do got the cash, to maintain that motorcycle and also to buy that motorcycle either in first hand or in second hand, if you have the cash, again I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not financially irresponsible. I'm telling you the facts. If you do have the cash to spare to buy a leader class motorcycle, then definitely you should buy a leader class motorcycle, ladies and gentlemen. The amount of joy, the amount of things that you learn, the amount of people that you tend to meet, the amount of riders, the amount of knowledge from the riders that you get when you are traveling using a leader class motorcycle, it's worlds apart, ladies and gentlemen. But do not be financially irresponsible, and do not tend to bother your parents to buy yourself a leader class motorcycle, ladies and gentlemen. Buy what you can and enjoy with that what you can, ladies and gentlemen. That said, hope you like this video, ladies and gentlemen. Hit that like, hit the subscribe, turn on that bell notifications, and always stay safe, and see you guys on the next one. Take care and peace.